I'm Anil Bansal. I'm one of the directors at IAAC. This session, I'm sure all of you know, is on book Kala by Sunita Kohli. The essays in Kala are by acclaimed architects, designers, authors, art historians, and academicians. There are chapters on history of architecture, the first Indian maps that were made for the pilgrimage and their evolution into today's map, and so much more information. Sunita Kohli, the editor of Kala, brings it together with a photo essay and a syncretic monumental architecture in India. I feel so privileged to introduce Sunita ji, this incredible dynamic lady. I'm very, very lucky to have spent time with her in New Delhi, looking at her work, her showroom, and also she gave me a personal tour of Indira Gandhi home, which now is a museum, including where Indira Gandhi ji was shot, assassinated. So I'm really, really thankful for creating a memory for me. Sunita Kohli ji is a national award winner in interior design, furniture manufacturer, and above all, a sincere conservationist. In 1992, she was conferred Padma Shri by the President of India and Mahila Shiromani Award by Mother Teresa. She is a globally recognized, national award-winning interior designer, furniture manufacturer, and above all, architectural restoration work since 1971. Her professional portfolio includes several significant public and heritage buildings, hotels, forts, palaces, libraries, museums, and few select residences in India, Egypt, Pakistan, Bhutan, and Sri Lanka. So we're going to get to hear a lot more, and it's been moderated by Nita Khanna. Nita Khanna ji is also an Indo-Canadian, creative entrepreneur. And yes, in US and Canada, there is a difference. I think Canada is better, so. A creative entrepreneur and a business owner with an academic background in English literature, literary theory, and aesthetics from Bombay University and University of Oxford in UK. She has worked as a writer, producer in advertising and film production. Nitaji is currently researching, and hopefully we'll talk to her as a book writer next year, on evolution of fasting as an impact on modern day concept of wellness. I shouldn't be talking about that. But enjoy this dynamic conversation, and best wishes. Thank you.
Thank you, Anil, for this very, very kind introduction for both of us. And I also want to thank the IAAC for inviting Nita and me here. We are absolutely delighted and deeply honored. And I also want to thank Nita Khanna because she is not the conventional moderator. We are in a conversation together which is really expository about cultural ideas. And I have chosen, and speaking of Kala, I have chosen this particular title for this anthology because India's design culture is a unique one. And what the Western world refers to as a collective of art, craft, architecture, and design is evocatively referred to by a singular term in the Indian context, and that is Kala. Kala creates enduring civilizational and cultural legacies which continue to inform the way we live, the way we work, and the way we create today. And having said that, there is a very short AV that has been produced by Jacqua, the company that actually sponsored this book. And this came after one had curated the first Times of India design exposition in Delhi. So could we see that, please? India's design culture is a unique one. What the Western world refers to as a collective of art, craft, architecture and design is evocatively referred to by a singular term in the Indian context, Kala. India's broad-based nature cuts across boundaries. It was a pleasure to delve into the minds of masters from diverse disciplines. I'm deeply honored that they have chosen to share their valuable essays for this anthology, Kala. To quote Michael Freeman on Indian design, a new generation of architects and interior designers is looking for what is modern as well as unique. India has had 5,000 years of indigenous styles, which were interrupted by a century of colonial ideas, an oddly compressed timeline of India's architecture and design. But this is now the beginning of a distinct period, a new trend of architectural creativity in India. In these pages, we seek to go beyond traditional confines and constructs to explore the many facets of design. From the architect of New Delhi, Sir Edwin Lutyens, whose work progressed from country houses in England to Government House in New Delhi, is an important presentation by Martin Lutyens. To a brilliant essay on modernity as tradition, Brazilian architecture before and beyond Niemeyer by Andrea Aranya Correa do Lago, ambassador to India and who has been a jury member of the Pritzker Awards, equivalent to the Nobel Prize for Architecture. To a wide range of fascinating perspectives by eminent personalities on contemporary design aesthetics that celebrate art, craft, architecture, and design etymologies. These are essays that should be compulsory reading in all architectural and design schools. Kala has essays by architects, designers and art historians, many of whom are prolific authors and builders of cultural institutions. Influences, and the transformation of the so-called English country house style is a brilliantly written essay on design by Lady Jane Churchill. An essay on taking an Indian brand to the world features artists' products that have been conceived by globally renowned designers who use the born from art approach to create objects of unsurpassed aesthetic and functional qualities. This thinking has resulted in many achievements and accolades for the brand artists. From cosmology to cartography, A Cultural Journey of Indian Maps is a deeply researched essay by the urban planner, Dr. Vivek Nanda, to essays on many other art and architectural forms, such as the ingenuity and beauty of the temporary architecture of exhibition structures. India's cultural and architectural heritage runs rich and deep, flowing from a 5,000-year-old history. It is a matter of pride that India is not a homogeneous culture. India is a living museum of syncretic cultures. This is best illustrated in India's architectural heritage. To quote, "Architecture is history written in stone." These lotuses are used as a leitmotif to illustrate the syncretism of Indian art and architecture. 1,000 lotuses, carved by Hindu craftsmen, adorn the ceiling of the prayer hall in this 17th century mosque in Gujarat. That is India. The journey of Kala, where many facets of design have been explored, would not have been possible without artis, that is, born from art. Artis pays tribute to fine traditions of exquisite craftsmanship by bringing together the finest in design and technology. It has been our privilege to bring to you Kala in association with artists, where two masterpieces have been crafted together as an ode to ultimate creativity.
Sunita, thank you for that wonderful AV that encapsulates everything that you are and the book is. But at the outset, I'd like to ask you if you could explain the symbiotic relationship between the geography, history, and culture of India, which is a key to understanding our Indian design aesthetics.
Well, the story really has to then begin in the beginning. And when there was no country called India, all the landmass of the continents as we know them today lay huddled together in the ancient seas. And it's about 170 million years ago that they started to break apart. And there's one chunk that from the eastern flank of what we know today as Madagascar that broke away and started a 100-million-year-old journey across the ancient seas. And till eventually about 40 million years ago, this triangular chunk of land with the mast at its center of almost of crystal. Therefore, actually, when you go to Ajanta and Ellora and you see geodesic rocks, which are inside is all crystal, this is actually from that original landmass. So this triangular chunk of land, after having sort of turned anti-clockwise, it began a slow northeast journey till it docked into the soft underbelly of the Asiatic plate. And it kept thrusting and thrusting, and thereby arose the Himalayas. And once the Himalayas had risen, there was snow, there were glaciers, and there were all the great rivers that started flowing down with 1,000 tributaries. And once these rivers started flowing down, they brought with them silt and which was alluvial. And it started filling up this trough at the bottom of the Himalayas. And this later became the Indo-Gangetic Plain, the deepest alluvial plain in the world. And therefore, that is what, on this land later on, arose the great empires. And it is these empires that have given rise to what we call our civilizational aspects in India today. And having said that, the Himalayas are still rising, and that is how this geography, or the geographies, have really created our histories today. So, may I make one request? Would you like to move this side? Yeah. I'm sorry, we've had to sit at an angle rather than sitting. No, you're fine. Rather than important than seeing us, you know. So
Sunita, thank you for that. And as the last slide on the genesis of India shows, there's an interlacing of trade routes here. And when we mention trade routes, there's an osmosis of culture inherent in that across geographies. So is there a common thread that runs through the diversity of essays in Kala in this compendium?
Well, what happens in this compendium, the common thread is really the centrality of design in all forms of artistic expression. And according to me, design is rooted in a multi-sensory experience of the world and the twin desire of the human eye to seek out beauty and of the mind's eye to make sense of our world and the environment. So design is foremost inspired by nature. As you will see in this slide, as you will see of this nautilus shell and a cross-section of it. And this is what Gaudí used for his amazing staircase in Barcelona. Now, design, it runs through art, craft, and it is everywhere, whether in nature or in objects hewn by the human hand. And whether you see it in contemporary architecture, it all has the same basis. And water plays a very important part in in all societies. Why just say that it is only India?
So can you cite some examples, Sunita, where all four elements that we speak of in the compendium Kala, which is art, craft, architecture, and design, and the centrality of design, where all these elements overlap?
So I think the first example that I would like to show is, I'm sorry, I'm so technologically challenged. You know? So I would, as a global example, I would really like to show the Basilica of La Sagrada Familia, and where Gaudí, as you know, and almost all of you, I'm sure, have seen this amazing building. Everything is inspired from nature. And in fact, there's an essay here by Sofia Abramchuk in this book, who heads the Gaudí Institute in Barcelona. And her whole thing is she explains the genius of Gaudí through his handwriting. On a domestic scale, I love to take the example of Tipu Sultan's summer palace. It is not monumental, but it is exquisite in its color palette and in its conception. And of course, on a monumental scale, this is Kailash Temple in Ellora, which is the largest monolithic structure in the world, which has been completely carved from the top down. And it is, of course, a World Heritage Site. Nita, now I need to ask you a question. You have written an essay for Kala called Cosmic Connections, Fasting, Feasting, and the Hindu Temple. Could you share some insights into your essay and also reference other essays which delve into the ideas and origins of indigenous design and architecture?
Sure, Sunita, and may I request you to change the slides because, not right now, we'll leave it on Kailasha.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
as,
of course. Thank you.
So I'd like to start this answer with a brief synopsis of 3 essays, brilliant essays, which traverse a similar landscape of ideas as mine, but each has a different focus. Indigenous Perspectives, The Discovery and History of Architecture, is a dialogue between the late architect Ashish Ganju, who actually very tragically passed away last year due to COVID, and architect Narendra Dengle, they both participated in the design festival as well. This essay is a continuation of the research for their book, The Discovery of Architecture, a contemporary treatise on ancient values and indigenous reality. And this forms part of a larger project to write a comprehensive history of Indian architecture from an indigenous perspective. Both the scholars believe that the aim of great architecture is to have a deep resonance with our internal being. Alluding to several ancient Indian concepts, such as the Sri Chakra, which is a Hindu mystical diagram representing energy, matter, and the source of all creation, the Bindu. Their essay connects continuously connects esoteric ideas from Indian philosophy and thought to the present and future, because they really believe that new generations of architects will need to, I open quote, become anchored by ancient values while being situated in indigenous reality, close quote. Next slide, Sunita. Dr. Shonalika Kaul's essay, titled Towards the Semantics of Architecture, also analyzes approaches to writing a new history of architecture from, again, an indigenous perspective. She proposes integrating the science of architecture with its humanist animating spirit. And central to her essay is the way she differentiates between the Western and Indian concepts of space itself. In the West, architecture is fundamentally articulated space or a containment of space by forms, whereas the Indian word for space is akash, which is considered an infinite continuum. So Dr. Kaul uses the Chitta Mandala to illustrate 3 layers of space here. The infinite external space, which she calls Paramakash, our mind space, which is the Chitta Akash, and our heart space, which is the Hriday Akash. So Dr. Kaul's essay emphasizes the vital link between these spaces as showing the link between the individual and universal, and in the Indian approach to design and architecture through the ages. Coming to my own essay, which you asked me about, titled Cosmic Connections, Feasting, Fasting, and the Hindu Temple. This is actually an offshoot when Sunita requested me to contribute an essay of my research on fasting from ancient to modern times. My essay tries to, and I quote from the essay, highlight some of the key connections between concepts of food and fasting in the Hindu tradition, the mythic worldview that underlies them, and the tangible expression in the Hindu temple architecture, close quote. I don't know how many of you know a little about fasting, but the Sanskrit word for fasting is upavas, which literally means being close to your consciousness. So going beyond the body corporal to realize one's inner self, been the guiding principle of many of the schools of Indian philosophy. And the consumption or abstinence from food was a natural part of this lifestyle, holistic lifestyles. Hindu temples reflect this journey in their architecture, both the Dravid and the Nagra styles. And they are laid out architecturally on the Vastu Purush Mandala, which is a representation of the universal cosmic body pinned down on all 4 corners by Prithvi, or the earth goddess. A visit to the temple was meant to bridge the space between the individual and the universal consciousness, the physical and the spiritual, and represented a journey to the core. There you go. Dr. Vivek Nanda's richly illustrated essay, From Cosmology to Cartography, showcases the evolution of the earliest pilgrimage maps made for a spiritual quest. Again, going from physical to spiritual and back again, which later evolved into the cartographic maps that we know today. So, Sunita, I come to my next question to you, connected to this whole, the holistic concepts, such as the ones I was talking to and referred to in the essays, are often associated with sustainability. So could you talk about your ideas on this contemporary topical buzzword in the context of 2 essays in the compendium written by Dr. Alka Pandey and Dr. Yuta Jain?
Well, I've always felt that although sustainability may be the universal buzzword for design today, in India, sustainability and utility have always go hand in hand and have always been a part of aesthetic beauty and been central to all design and architecture. So sustainability is a bedrock that we've always had. Now, Dr. Alka Pandey, in her essay titled Pancha Tattva, which means the 5 elements, the way ahead, she speaks about the centrality of the 5 natural elements to all design and architecture. And here she's illustrated her lecture by temples that are devoted to the 5 elements, and this is to Vayu, to air, and to Agni is fire. And in Dr. Yuta Jain's absolutely brilliant article and essay, and she also has a book on water architecture in India. This is, of course, Modera in Gujarat, which is absolutely superb, because the concept of having water bodies is absolutely central to in India, whether it is the tank temples, the tanks in temples, whether it's in Mughal architecture, whether it's in Buddhist architecture. So it's absolutely central, the concept of water. And this is, of course, Fatehpur Sikri and the central pavilion, which is enclosed on 4 sides, or surrounded on 4 sides by water. And this is the pond at this absolutely exquisite Mukteshwar temple in Orissa, which probably has, I'm sure many of you have been to Mukteshwar, in Bhubaneswar, which has absolutely the most exquisite toran that one has ever seen. I'll continue with...
Yeah, so superb craftsmanship was at the heart of almost all construction in India. How do the 5 essays on craft exemplify your own views on this key element of the color matrix?
Well, I have always felt that craft is the instrument that allows the vision of design to be completed. And Jaya Jaitley, in her essay titled Positioning Arts and Crafts at the heart of India's culture, writes about their centrality to the everyday life in India. And she's shown a doorway, which is a painted doorway, carved and painted doorway, which is Buddhist in nature. And then the glorious legacy and she also speaks about the embroideries that are done in villages across Gujarat. And they wear all their jewelry, which is so charming, because that's the way they sit embroidering in everyday life. And of course, the greatest art and craft that exists in India is from everyday objects and textiles. And then we have Nita, and this is also how in dance, in the performing arts, they will paint their bodies, use their bodies as a canvas. And of course, not all of it is body. There are also these coverings that these Tayyam dancers use. And in Rita Chishti's essay, which is about spinning and carding and the production of textiles, she also speaks about all these weavers. And I have to say that there are 40 million weavers in India. And at a rough estimate, there are 200 million people who are involved who are artisans and who are trained craftsmen. And that, of course, brings us to, and then there is an essay on indigo by Anjana Somani. And indigo has had a very checkered history in India because of, dare I say the word, but the cruelty that was imposed by colonial masters in the making of this blue dye, which became identified for a time as the color of India. So this was a brilliant essay and a brilliant talk that she had given. And then there's another essay just on the craft of one small tiny town on the eastern coast of India, which is Pipli, and applique work and the painted patachitras that are there. And this is what I say, this is just one example of one small town. Across the length and breadth of this vast country, there are 200 40 million people who are involved in the crafts, who are artisans, and who are textile weavers, or in the process of creating the textiles, whether they're spinning the yarn. So, but this goes also into the custom, crafting the custom-made cars that came into India. And this is from a museum of transport, in fact, which I was involved in the design of. And so this is from a sort of a client of mine. And he wrote this wonderful essay on these vintage cars that he collects. And this brings me to...
It's called The Design of Custom-Built Cars, and Diljit Titus is the author.
Yeah.
Sunita, I'd like to ask you, while we are on the subject of craft, how are, because we're talking about contemporary and ancient India and monumental, how are some of the new architects incorporating, I think they're doing a lot with
Yes.
craftsmen to incorporate their work.
I'm glad you asked me that, Nita, because it's only it's not just seeing sort of indigenously inspired buildings, but in contemporary architecture is happening. So there was another speaker who was called Sonali Rastogi. She's a very well-known architect, and she's a very contemporary architect. And what she's done is that, and she does very large projects. They're all contemporary in nature, but she brings in craftsmen into it. So whether they are potters or whether they are doing a whole, 30-storied high facade, which is all out of mirrors. I mean, it's absolutely brilliant and unique. And then there are architects, younger architects of another generation, younger people like somebody like Nita Kohli, who's completely contemporary, but is rooted in using crafts that belong to India. And I think there's this wonderful, juxtaposition that takes place, and which I think in a country as rich as ours. And I think that needs to happen, and it's happening more and more, so which is a very good and positive thing. And also,
Isn't sustainability, when we were talking about that, they're incorporating elements like potters, right?
Yes.
Sonali used, I think, gave employment to 200 potters to actually
Exactly.
climate control a building in a very warm town. It's a public building, so with pottery designed by them, and yeah. So that brings me to another question. How can this rich legacy of India be preserved and protected for future generations? Three seminal essays in this anthology look for answers in atypical ways. So can you give your own opinion on that?
well, there's one essay called The Challenges of Museums by Dr. Deborah Tyagarajan. And she built something called, with the help of other women, something called Dakshin Chitra, which translates itself into southern art. And this is just outside Chennai in southern India. And what she did was she bought very typical houses from 5 states in India and dismantled them and then had them rebuilt in this land that she had taken. And each houses a museum. Now, not only does it house artifacts, but there, there are the living arts of dance and of pottery, workshops. So they're also educational institutions. This is just one example. Of course, and she had given this wonderful talk and has contributed this essay. And so these are 2 examples of houses. I'm not showing all. And there's weaving that takes place and which people can come and see. There are potters, there are folk dancers. Again, there are these Tayyam dancers from Kerala. And and another essay. So Debbie does all of this. And then Tasneem Mehta took over a museum an old museum in Mumbai, which was very decrepit and in a very sad state. So she spearheaded that whole effort to have it completely restored, and the interiors, which are really quite beautifully done now. I mean, it's a 19th century. It's originally a 19th century museum. And in fact, it's now listed as one of the museums that one must visit when one is in Mumbai. And there is a third essay, which is by Dr. Shobita Punja, where she speaks how can we capitalize on this cultural heritage, where she speaks about the problems that are inherent there. Because, you know, in India, we suffer from an excess of riches, an excess of craftsmanship, an excess of heritage buildings. I mean, we are a poor country, and yet we have such an excess of all of this. So how are these things? I mean, I think these are fantastic women who are doing fantastic work. Of course, there are also some men who are doing fantastic work, I have to say. No, you know, but you know, I mean, these are people who are spearheading, and really, and may their tribe increase. That brings me to a question that...
Sunita, before we move ahead, you know, how we talked about patronage, right? Yes. And how, you know, starting point for preserving, you know, oft neglected tangible and intangible cultures. Would patronage be, yeah.
When we speak about patronage, it doesn't have to be patronage in a brick and mortar way. I mean, patronage can also happen in many other ways. For instance, Sandeep Putoria, who was also a speaker at this Festival of Design that had taken place, he spearheads a foundation which deals in the dissemination of literature. And so he has all these book events that happen throughout India. And I must say one has been fortunate that, in fact, both Nita and I have participated in this in Calcutta, Hyderabad, and in Bangalore. So there's not an author that he doesn't speak about. And then there are people who have written about the culture of giving. And the author article is right here, Dr. Shiban Ganju. And he is also a contributor to the book. And he has spoken about this culture of giving, and that is best exemplified from his absolutely outstanding work that he has been doing in India. So now may I ask you a question? So, so Nita, how do the essays on the visual and performing arts and the written word link with the central theme of design that underlies this compendium of Kala?
Difficult one, but in answer to this, Sunita, I would like to quote the award-winning architect who's got a fantastic essay in the book. His name is Architect, and one of his projects in New York has won a design award. Architect Jose Maria the Churchichuga writes in his essay what it means to design, projection, mood, and perspective. He says, open quote, "To design is to make visible a particular way of looking at the world. Poetry, painting, music, everything could be reduced to a way of seeing the world," close quote. In keeping with this, Spanish sculptor Alberto de Udeta, in his essay titled Evolution in and of My Art, says, and I quote, "My desire is to create a space with these sculptures where we may all reflect on the eternal questions. Where did we come from? Who are we? Where are we going?" The huge scale of Udeta's sculptures is correspondingly architectural in its magnitude. Architect and urban planner Kelvin Ang, who's from Singapore, in his essay speaks about photography as an aid memoir and how visuals capture memory through life. And Bharatnatyam dancer Malika Sarabhai recounts the journey of design in her life in her essay, A Personal Journey. life in design and in dance. And the written word comes alive in historian Manu Pillai's essay, The Queen's Speech. Manu's narrative is about powerful women who have been relegated to the footnotes of history, such as Begum Samru, Tarabai, and Nur Jahan, and several others, due to what he calls the Victorian colonization of the Indian mind. And I quote Manu here, "Controlling knowledge, vocabulary, and the imagination has had enduring effects on our cultural memory," close quote. And this is applicable to a lot of our, art, architecture, design, everything. And Manu calls for a need to purge this affliction, as he calls it, in order to see not just our history, but our own culture. There are several exceptional essays in the book that reflect changes in Indian architecture, that reflect tradition and modernity and the forging of new identities. I'd like you, Sunita, now to share your thoughts on these seminal essays in the book.
Well, a keynote essay was by Martin Lutjens with Dr. John Goodall, and in which the essay was titled From Country House to Government House. Government House, of course, being the palace of Rashtrapati Bhavan that was built between 1913 and completed in 1931. And so this was a journey that he made, and he gave this keynote address. And then another essay was Modernity as Tradition, where the Brazilian architecture before and beyond Niemeyer. And this was given by Ambassador Andre Tolago, and where he spoke about what existed, what Niemeyer and and the people who came after Niemeyer, and what they did with contemporary architecture. And Architectonic Harmony is an essay by the architect Kohli, who incidentally studied, she got her degree in architecture from Pratt Institute in New York, of which we are all very proud, and therefore New York is very close to the heart. And in this, she is a contemporary architect. She's a contemporary architect and a designer, but most importantly, she's also a furniture manufacturer, where a lot of craftsmanship is used because you work with master craftsmen, master furniture manufacturers. And so this always, year after year, this is what is showcased, the craftsmanship that goes into everything. And in this, and then there's another essay by Lady Jane Churchill, which speaks about the English style. And she's a great influencer as far as the English style is concerned, not only just in Britain, but really globally also. And now I want to ask you a question about, architecture and designers speak about, they design, but there also has to be the dissemination of design,
right,
to move the story forward. So since you've been a media person, you're the right person really to answer this.
Yeah, well, I'd like to pull in a bit of literature here. The award-winning Indian novelist Jeet Thayil has written a wonderful essay on the strange joy of reading cookbooks without ever actually cooking. And design magazines, TV, HGTV, TV shows, YouTube, apps, games, websites have a similar magical hold on our imagination. We don't really renovate homes, but we think we have, right? But augmented and virtual reality will further fulfill our desire for immersive design experiences and also enhance, importantly, commercial visibility for practitioners. Publisher Bibhor Srivastav, in his essay, The Dissemination of Design, speaks of how multimedia technology is leading both an evolution and a revolution in the field of design. And to know more, you'll have to go to the book and read a little bit about that. And Sunita, and as in we're coming to the end of our time also, the last essay in the book is a wonderful photo essay by you titled Monumental Architecture of India, a testimony to syncretic culture. And I'd like you to take the audience today on this wonderful syncretic journey.
So this is a journey because mine was a photo essay. So I start with Bhimbetka, which is a World Heritage Site, and this houses the earliest creative expressions, which are paintings inside these caves. These are 30,000-year-old paintings that have been found there, and absolutely magnificent, the whole topography of the area. And then there's the 3rd century BC stupa of Sanchi, which is Buddhist. And actually from the dome and the railing of this 3rd century BC stupa is what Lachians took as the dome of Rashtrapati Bhavan. When I say Rashtrapati Bhavan, for the few foreigners who are here, it was Viceroy House when the British were here. And after that, it is now the residence of the President of India. And at that time, when it was completed, it was the largest palace built in the world with its 360 rooms and loggias. So then, of course, there are the medieval temple architecture, which is superb. And then there is the Bhojpur 10th century with its temple bells, which again influenced Lachians when he created the 10th order. Then there are mosques that are throughout India. This is in Bhopal, the 2nd largest in the world. Then there's the syncretic Indo-Islamic in the great city of Hampi or Vijayanagaram. There is the Queen's Palace. There is the Queen's Bath with, again, its water tank and these wonderful spouts that created. That was in the Queen's Bath, and this is in the Virupaksh temple in Hampi again. And this was the last great excavated site. This is the tank which was excavated at Hampi. And then India many of its temples, like this great Hoysala temple in southern Karnataka, where these carved bands are really storyboards of history. And it's absolutely superb. And the interiors of this, I mean, there are very few countries really in the world, please don't think I'm being chauvinistic because I'm an Indian, which can actually rival this. I mean, this magnificence of what we have. And then I speak about the delicacy, the color palette of the summer palace also in South India, in Srirangam. And again, this also, I mean, this again is a painted facade. And this also tells the story of wars won, and it is, in that sense, commemorative history.
I'm really, really sorry. We have time constraint. The second session is ready. Love to have you guys. As you can see, this is a very exciting and a very a book which can make us feel all very, very proud of our heritage.
We need only
really well.
2 minutes. It's finished.
So, okay.
Yeah, just very quickly.
Okay, so this is the 17th century Jami Masjid, which is in a 7th century city in Gujarat, which used to be the 7th century capital of Gujarat. And there are 1,000 lotuses that are carved there by Hindu craftsmen for an Islamic monument. And this is the Qutub complex and the Sun Temple, Konarak, and Lingaraj, and of course the 16th century Humayun's tomb, which was the prototype for the Taj Mahal. And then there are rock temples which are there, and this is Ajanta Ellora, and how it was discovered, what happens inside, because you never saw how deep were these Chaitya halls that were there, and the amazing frescoes And this is the last slide. This is a Kailash again. And here, everything comes together. Art, architecture, and this could only have been made, carved from the top down, by hundreds, if not thousands of architects, engineers, people who understood structure, dancers, musicians. I mean, this is the magnificence that is truly India, and this is what we need to conserve. Thank you so much for your patience. And very quickly after that, because it has to do with it has to do with intangible heritage. Okay, we need to, and may I request my cousin, Siran, to come? Yeah,
So I want to say a couple of comments on this book launch. I'm sure all of you are beginning to experience the IAAC sense and sensibility, which is quite unique in the world of festivals. And one of our core commitments is to make sure that at every lit festival, we feature cookbooks. Cooking knows no religion. Cooking knows no politics. Cooking holds true only to rasa. And rasa don't lie. You heard it from me. Rasa don't lie. And it is the foundation of culture. And if you look at the roots of our food, who was the greatest chef? Chef Nala. He's a Nishada. And the gods gladly take food cooked by him. And who is the other goddess? Annapurna. And she comes out of the temple, the goddess comes out of the temple, and gives food to this beggar because she recognizes that that beggar is Lord Shiva. So food for us is without boundary, social boundary, but full of compassion. We are so proud to have you here in this book launch of this book.
Thank you so much. It's been such a distinct honor for us.
It has been an honor for us also.
I really thank you.
The festivities continue tonight. Let's help
Very
David.
well said.